Hey pals, sorry it's been a few weeks without a video. I've had somewhat of a third life crisis. I don't want to call it a midlife crisis just yet. Hopefully I'll live longer than just another half-life. So yeah, I've not had a great few weeks. I've been off work for a few weeks. I'm slowly sort of feeling back to normal, mental health wise, but it's been a slow process. And so I have been sort of battling with my reading. At the start of this sort of episode I've had, I was attempting to read the book along list, and I've seen many other people upload videos on the book along list, and most of those people have said they're disappointed, and I agree. I've enjoyed a couple of the books, but overall I've been left with a sense of, were these really the 13 best books of the last year? I don't think so. And so I eventually decided to just sort of stop punishing myself and to stop reading them. I do still have one, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, but the rest of them I'm just putting on pause and not going to rush to read them, because I just feel like reading books that make me feel happy. So that wasn't working, and so in the last week I've decided to revert to either rereading favourite books or just reading whichever book on my shelves takes my fancy, whether that's a book I've read before or a book I haven't read before. And that's made me feel, quite a lot better mentally. I think when you have a bit of a low period with your mental health, it's really hard to find joy in anything, and something has to be especially comforting to work. And so I think rereading books where I know what's going to happen and I've really enjoyed them the first time round is really good for that. And also I'm taking pleasure in reading books that feel somewhat sort of familiar and not too outlandish, and just to have a sense of sort of comfort to them. So yeah, that is where I'm at. And so I thought, as is just an ease-in video, because I'm really not in the headspace to do a review video, I will do a wrap-up shortly of the book of books I've read and my thoughts on the long list, and I will also do a wrap-up of the other books I've been reading in the last month or so. But yeah, I just thought I would start with an easy video. And so I currently have exactly 30 books in my physical TBR. If you have been following my progress over the years, at its largest, I had 270 unread books. That was the biggest my physical TBR ever got. If you don't know, TBR stands for to be read. And I hated it. I hated it being that big. I felt really overwhelmed by it. I'd have books that I'd bought, more than a couple of years ago, and I find that my taste changes quite a lot. So I was no longer interested in those books, and then I felt guilty. And yeah, I just didn't enjoy having that much choice, basically. And so I decided to try and reduce my TBR to 0, which I nearly did at the end of 2022. I think I had 12 books maybe that I hadn't read still to carry over to this year. And I've managed to keep the number of unread books I own below 15 all year, which is mad when I look back on how many I used to have. But I wanted to never have more than 30 unread books, including library books, in the house at any one time. Now, I have broken that rule probably quite a few times throughout the year, because my library lets me borrow, I think, around 25 books at a time, and I nearly always have 25 books out. And I have mainly been reading library books, but I've also pre-ordered books I'm really excited about and then read them immediately, which I love. That's such a nice feeling, just getting a book and reading it straight away. But you will notice, if you watch my channel faithfully, that some of these books I'm about to show you I got for Christmas last year. And so they've still sat here, even with such a tiny TBR, they've still sat here unread. And a lot of them I picked up in the Waterstones half price off hardback sale. And so it just goes to show, when I don't buy a book that I'm super excited about, when I buy a book because of any sort of deal, it does tend to linger a little bit. So I still want to read these books, and I really want to read them by the end of the year. But I've definitely focused much more on library books and pre-orders. So yeah, I'm just going to go through the stack. The first one I have to mention is the only new book that I actually own, and that is The Rehearsal by Eleanor Catton. I have decided that for the remainder of this year, I'm going to read either really sort of seasonal appropriate books, that being, in my mind, books that are set in cold countries and historical fiction. Those are the things I find really sort of comforting reading in autumn and winter. And also I'm going to try and read books from authors who I previously read and enjoyed books from. Does that make sense? And so the other day when I was in the city, I just really felt like picking one of those books up, and I looked in the library and couldn't find any of the ones that were on my list. But when I went to my local Waterstones, they did have this one, which, have I already said, is The Rehearsal by Eleanor Catton. So I decided to pick this one up. I read Birnam Wood when it came out earlier this year, loved it. It's one of my favourite reads of the year. I haven't read The Luminaries, which I know I should definitely read, but this is a lot less intimidating. This is, I think, her first novel. And I've read quite a few books this year that are sort of like campus or school settings, and been reminded of how much I really enjoy that setting, as I know a lot of people do. And this is set in, I think, an all-girls school, and it is about an affair one of the students has with an older teacher. So it's sort of a story we've heard of before, but it says it is a really interesting look at the power that young girls hold and the sort of darkness that can be hidden in these type of schools. And so I'm just interested to read whatever Eleanor Catton writes, but have a particular interest in school settings, campus settings, that sort of thing. All the others I've shown you at some point. The only other one I've bought since Christmas and not yet read is Post Dramatic by Chantal V. Johnson. I think this sounds really interesting. I'm definitely going to try and get to this one in the next few weeks, because since I've had it on my shelves, I kept looking at it and wanting to pick it up. But the problem with having a lot of library books out is a lot of the time they've got dates I have to return them by because someone else is waiting, and so I just focus all on that to get them back in time for the deadline. And so books that I've bought that I'm really excited about tend to linger a bit longer. So we follow this woman who's a dedicated lawyer who advocates for mentally ill patients at a psychiatric hospital, and she comes across as really successful to everybody else, but inside she's really struggling with her mental health. She self-medicates with a mix of dating, dieting, dark humour and smoking weed, but a family reunion makes her sort of have to reassess everything. I think this book is supposed to have lots of triggering content, hence the title, I think, but I read the first couple of pages and really liked the tone, so I'm really looking forward to this one. Another one, which I'm sort of glad I waited and hadn't got around to reading yet, is Gallant by V.E. Schwab, because of course I think this book will be sort of autumn appropriate, so I will definitely be reading this one soon. I don't think I need to tell you what this is about. This was a super popular book, but I started to listen to this on audio last year and thought it was really enjoyable, but I knew that the actual physical book had lots of illustrations, so I wanted to experience it that way, so I picked up the hardback. I have The Curse of Chalian by Lois McMaster Bujold. This author writes a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and this is the start of an epic fantasy series that's supposed to be really, really good. I read the first couple of chapters of this earlier this year and then just wasn't really in the mood for fantasy. I thought I'd have a really fantasy heavy year, but I haven't, and I think it's because I do much prefer reading fantasy in the colder and darker months. So hopefully I will get to this one in the next couple of months. But yeah, I heard really amazing things about this. It's supposed to be a much more sort of slow epic fantasy, which I enjoy. Then we have At Certain Points We Touch by Lauren John Joseph. This came out last year and I haven't heard many people talk about it, but the people I have heard talk about it are quite split. They either love it or hate it. I think this is, I know people have said a little bit like Sally Rooney, although I think every book now that is about a sort of young relationship is compared to Sally Rooney. We follow a narrator who's like looking back 10 years earlier at a relationship they had with someone that was like a really toxic, tumultuous relationship. And it's supposed to be like a really interesting look at that relationship. Then we have Woman of Light by Callie Fajardo-Anstine. I read her short story collection, which was called Sabrina and Karina, which I really loved. And this is her first novel, and this is a family drama set in Denver. And this goes all the way back to the 1930s, and we're following a group of Indigenous women. And then, we follow them. It says it's a multi-generational Western saga. I'm a little bit dubious about this. I picked this up because I absolutely loved her short story collection and vowed when I read it that whatever she released, I would buy. I've had quite mixed reviews about this one, and I also tend not to enjoy family sagas. I don't really like books that span a lot of years because I find that there's like a sense of remove and distance because you have to cover so much time in a short amount of pages. Pretty much picked this up because of who the author is. So we shall see, but I'm going in with sort of lowered expectations. Then we have the short story collection Rainbow by Lydia Conkling. I've heard this is really good. This is a collection of LGBT, it says, collection of stories that celebrate the humour, darkness and depth of emotion of the queer and trans experience from a new voice that is certain to belong to the canon of contemporary queer literature. So I don't know why I haven't read this one yet. And then these two I've had for quite a while. I'm Telling the Truth But I'm Lying by Bassi Ikpi. This is a memoir in essays which I read half of over a year ago and enjoyed, and then put to one side for whatever reason. So I will start this one from the start when I pick it up. And then I also have Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice by Leah Lakshmi Pepshner Shamarasina. This is supposed to be a really amazing book on sort of disability activism, and it is a collection of essays. So yeah, this looks like it might be quite hard going in terms of like when I flick through, there seems to be a lot of information. So I need to be like in the right headspace to take on board a lot of information, I think. Then on to the stack of library books that I've probably hauled a couple of months ago. You'll notice that there's a lot of books I'm not mentioning here because I've read them and probably have since reviewed them, or I'm going to. But these are the ones that have lingered. Like I said, they've lingered because other people aren't requesting them, so I'm not having to read them and return them. And so the books that have hard deadlines are always the priority, but I am trying my best now to sort of focus on this stack and work my way through it. So as you can see, I'm currently reading Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. Very much enjoying it. I think I heard people say this before, but it does give sort of major Fleabag vibes, which is good for my mood right now. And then I have Alligator and Other Stories by Dima Al-Zayat. I heard great things about this collection and so knew I needed to pick it up. I have The Death of Vivek Oj by Akwaeke Emezi. I read their novel that came out last year, which is Death Made a Fool of Your Beauty, something like that, and really enjoyed it. So I picked this one up and need to get through that. I also have The Last of Her Kind by Sigrid Nunes. I really hope to enjoy this one. I think it has quite split opinions, but this is slightly bigger than a lot of the other ones I have out at the moment, so I haven't got to it. But I think this also has sort of campus vibes, female friendship vibes, and maybe a crime at the heart of it. So all those things sound perfect. Then I have The Wild Laughter. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that Irish name because I will probably butcher it. But I've wanted to read this for years. This follows a family, predominantly the two brothers. It says, it's a sharp snapshot of a family and a nation suddenly unmoored. It is an epic in miniature that explores cowardice and sacrifice, faith rewarded and abandoned, the stories we tell ourselves and the ones we resist. I have seen that this is also an audio on script, so I will probably listen to this while I read along so that I actually know how to pronounce all the Irish names. Then we have Welcome Me to the Kingdom by Mine O'Done. This is a beautiful short story collection that I asked the library to buy. So I need to read it so that it's on the shelves and other people can see it. All these stories are set in Bangkok, and I think some of these stories sort of link into one another, so that's something I always enjoy. Then we have Shutter by Ramona Emerson. Can you see that properly? I think this is a really cool cover. This is an Indigenous novel. It is a thriller. It's about a woman who I think takes photos of crime scenes, but she has an ability to sort of touch bodies or things left behind by people and like receive messages from beyond. And it's about the murder of an Indigenous woman, and she becomes involved in that case and is helping to investigate with her skills. Then we have another hardback, and that is Here Again Now by Okachukwu Nzela. I've heard really good things about this as well, and this is a novel that focuses on three men, I think, in Peckham in London. We have a young man and his father, and then also the man he has started dating. And this is supposed to be a really emotional novel, so I will read that when I feel strong enough to do it. This is like one of the most beautiful books I currently have, and that is Year of the Tiger, An Activist Life by Alice Wong. I really love the way this is put together. It's on really high quality paper, and it just has like a combination of things like comic book strips, photos. I just saw a recipe for soup. It looks really interesting, and this is a collection of the work Alice Wong has put out during her activism about disability rights. So yeah, I think I'm really going to enjoy this. But again, because it is like a bit different in terms of the format and non-fiction, I want to make sure I have the headspace to take on board some of the more thought-provoking essays within this one. And the next one you'll see a couple of tabs in, and that's because I started reading this 6 weeks ago probably, and loved the first 2 essays, really think the writing style is amazing. But again, I wanted to make sure I was in the right headspace. I don't really think I'm in the right headspace for non-fiction right now that is really heavy on facts or sort of beautifully written in a sort of complex way, because I don't want to like sort of miss things, and I think this might fall into that second category, and that is Places I've Taken My Body by Molly McCulley Brown. This is a memoir, again formed by a collection of essays, which is something I love. And then lastly, we have The Last Days, a memoir of faith, desire and freedom by Ali Miller. I might pick this one up soon because I've had a flick through and I think it's going to be quite easy to read. It's very much a memoir. It doesn't look like it has like any sort of facts or statistics or anything like that. And this is about the author growing up as a Jehovah's Witness in a town in, well, it says a town that borders, a town in the Scottish borders. So not sure if that means England or Scotland. But I am really enjoying reading books set in the UK, like at around the time I grew up, because when I'm feeling low, I like reading things that feel somewhat familiar. So I'm thinking this will have like an element of nostalgia to it, but obviously a very different life to mine. And I've heard really good things about this memoir, so would like to get to it. So those are all the ones I've already told you about. So let's move on to the new ones. I borrowed this from the library probably a couple of years ago now and didn't get to it. Probably not a good book to read right now, but hopefully when I'm feeling a bit, bit more mentally resilient, I will get to this one. And that is Bread for All, The Origins of the Welfare State by Chris Renwick. This looks like it may be a little bit dry, but I studied history for one of my A-levels and we studied the welfare state, like the formation of the welfare state in England, and I thought it was fascinating, but I've forgotten a lot of it. So I would like to read this book and sort of, revisit that period and have a more solid foundation for like contemporary British politics. So there we go. Then I have the only other book that I intend to still read quite soon, and that is Western Lane by Chetna Maru. This is one of the ones that I already had on a sort of a list of books I wanted to read. So when it was long listed, it just sort of bumped it up the list. So I am still going to read this one, hopefully in the next week. And when I have, I will then do, a wrap up of all the books I've read. So there's that one. It's one of the many books on the book along list about grief and the loss of a mother. So hopefully I'll enjoy that one. Then we have Riambel by Priya Hine. I asked my library to pick this one up because it was getting a little bit of like Booker long list buzz before the long list was announced. Obviously it wasn't long listed, but Pearl by Sian Hughes was, which is from the same small indie press. So I would guess they probably only got to submit one book. This is about a young girl who was growing up in Mauritius, and this is a coming of age story. It's supposed to be really poetic, and I have had a flick through. I'm worried that some of it might be too poetic for me, but we shall see, because as you may know, I do love a young girl coming of age story. So there we go. Then I have Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth. This I think is a new release, and I don't know if it just went straight to paperback. I think I could really love this one. This is another Irish book that I've seen on Scribd on audio, and so I think this is one I will probably also listen to as I read along. It says, Sunburn is an astute and tender portrayal of first love, adolescent anxiety, and the realities of growing up in a small town where tradition holds people tightly in its grasp. We follow 15-year-old Lucy in the 1990s in a small Irish village as she's choosing between a relationship with a sort of young boy who she went to school with, who she's sort of always known, and then also a new romance she starts to pursue with a young woman. So she's sort of choosing between the conventional life and this life that probably will make her happier and I think it sounds like it's going to be like a super page turner and a book I would have loved reading as a teenager, but will probably still love reading now. And then we have a book by an author I've previously read, and that is Milk Teeth by Jessica Andrews. I read her debut novel Saltwater and enjoyed it, and so decided I sort of wanted to follow her career. This came out last year, but I didn't get to it. This is about another girl who, like her first novel, who grew up in the northeast of England. It says that years later she's living in tiny rented rooms and working in noisy bars across London and Paris. She meets someone who offers her a new way to experience the world, but he invites her to visit him in Barcelona, and it says she starts to feel uneasy. She is faced with both pleasure and shame and must find out if she is able to change. I found Saltwater like super readable. The author is around my age, I think a little bit younger. And so, like really reminiscent of the sort of food described as the sort of food I would have eaten when I was growing up. And so, I think I will really enjoy this one. The next novel I asked my library to buy, and they very kindly did. And I've read the first chapter of this, which is about 30 pages. And I'm unsure. I don't know if I like the writing style. And this is the third novel by this author, I think, and the previous two novels, I also thought they sounded really interesting, but again was just unsure if her writing style would be for me. It's always annoying, isn't it, when that happens, when there's like an author and you think, God, all the things you write about sound fascinating, but then when you try and read them, the writing just doesn't work for you. So I am going to persevere and try and read more than the first chapter, but I've lowered my expectations somewhat. But, this does still sound amazing, and I think a lot of people will probably want to read this one. And that is incredibly beautiful. I think that is one of the best covers I've seen this year. Time's Mouth by Eden Lepaki. So, this is a really long blurb. The premise of this is we're following a young woman called Ursa, initially at least, and she has the ability to travel through her own memory and revisit her past, but only her past. She flees her hometown for the counterculture glory of 1950s California, and she starts to sort of develop her skill. And she basically forms like a cultish community of sisterhood. But it takes an ominous turn, which causes her son Ray and his pregnant lover Cherry to flee their home for LA and reinvent themselves. But escaping their past won't be so easy. A series of mysterious events forces Cherry to abandon their baby, leaving Ray to raise Opal alone. And then we move on to following Opal's story. And it says, from the forests of Santa Cruz to the 1980s glam of Melrose Avenue to a solitary mansion among the oil derricks off La Cienega Boulevard, and brimming with a double-edged capacity of memory to both heal and harm, Time's Mouth is a poignant and evocative excavation of the bonds that bind family together. I mean, that just sounds brilliant, doesn't it? But because it's following a lot of years, even the first chapter sort of covered quite a lot of weeks and sort of had that sense of distance as it just sort of relayed things to you. So I'm not sure, but the writing about the sort of scenery and the area was amazing. So I'm going to persevere, but I would love to know if you've read any of her previous novels, because I think they both sound brilliant. Then we have another Irish novel. I think this is the last one on the list. I think it is. And that is Wild Geese by Sula Emanuel. And I also really like this cover. I don't know how well you can see it. There's not really much to it, but I sort of like that about it. So, this is following a woman called Phoebe Ford. It says new home, new name, and newly 30. She has emigrated to Copenhagen with her anxious dog Dolly, and it says almost 3 years into her gender transition, she has learned to move through the world carefully, savouring small moments of joy. A woman without a past can be anyone she wants, that is, until an unexpected visit from Grace, her first love, brings back memories of Dublin and a life she thought she'd left behind. Over the course of a single weekend, as their old romance kindles something sweet and radically unfamiliar, Grace helps Phoebe to navigate the jagged edges of migration, nostalgia, and hope. I think that sounds really wonderful. I always read the first few pages of library books when I get them, and I really liked the writing style in this one. I think this is one I'd probably just sit and read in a day, so we'll hopefully get to this one very soon. The next one I definitely won't read in a day. It is ginormous, and that is Fane by Anne-Marie MacDonald. Now, confusingly, Anne-Marie MacDonald is, I think, a pretty successful Canadian author. But this book is set in Scotland. This is a historical fiction novel. The back doesn't give much away. It says we are following this vast estate called Fane in Scotland. The Lord is very mysterious, and he only comes out at night to visit with his precocious young daughter Charlotte. And we are following Charlotte's sort of coming of age story as she enters society. It says this is a page-turning queer story of longing, belonging, history and identity. So I think this could be like an amazingly atmospheric autumn read. We'll see if this one works, really hope so. I did read the first couple of pages and Charlotte was very precocious, maybe annoyingly so. So yeah, we shall see. Down to the last two. This next one is another one I think I'll read quite soon. That is Oh Sister by Jodie Chapman. I read the first couple of pages of this one again and was really quickly pulled in by the writing style. This is about three women, and I think these three women are, I think this religion, it says they're part of a really sort of controlling religious group, and I think it's based on Jehovah's Witnesses, although I'm not entirely sure because it doesn't say in the blurb. It says we follow these three women, Isabel, Jen and Zelda, three women whose bodies and minds are not their own. And it says they are all desperate to find a life to call their own. This is a novel about what it is like to live inside a prison of the mind and how you can break out of it if you can. I don't know, is this historical? Because it felt a bit historical in the first few pages, but I don't think it is, but it felt like, and I've only read a few pages, it reminded me a little bit of Sarah Waters' writing style, but in a like contemporary sense. I love novels that focus on all women, of course, but I like novels that focus on sort of characters that maybe aren't really close to one another but are somehow linked. I think that's really interesting when you then see them sort of encroach on each other's stories. And yeah, I'm hoping to really enjoy this one. Also, I really like the cover. And now we're on to the last book. This is the 30th book in my 30-book TBR. And that is All That's Left Unsaid by Tracy Lyon. This is a fairly new release Australian novel that I've had really good reviews on. And this is focused around a crime, although I think this is more of a slow build family drama than it is a crime novel. And all the sort of quotes on it are just saying this is like a brilliant family drama, which you know I love. So yeah, I'd love to know, out of those 30 books, which ones you think I should prioritise. I definitely need to read Western Lane because I know there's a big queue behind me at the library for that one. So I'll definitely read that one in the next few days and return it as soon as I can. But yeah, other than Western Lane, which ones do you think I should prioritise? Have you read any of them? Let me know down below. I would be interested to hear if you enjoyed them or didn't enjoy them. Either way, I'm always intrigued. And yeah, like which ones would you most like to hear me review? And also I'm always intrigued to know like which books you are planning to focus on soon, and if you like read seasonally, if you are planning on picking up some books for the coming change in the seasons. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!